A library of stone. It holds whispers from a world before words. That's what ancient visual symbols are. They were the first method, the most enduring method for storing knowledge long term. You can look at an ancient monument, you can read it, not as a ruin, as a resilient data drive from the past, a carved animal on a temple wall. It could store precise astronomical data. A culture would encode its entire legal system into the pattern of a woven blanket. There are principles, ingenious principles. They turned art into eternal archives. They preserved everything, star maps, moral codes, across thousands of years. What message should we send to the future? What's the most important one? A cave painting can tell a story, that's art, but then you have something else, a series of dots placed precisely above an animal, and those dots line up with a crack in the rock. A crack that only lets light through on the spring equinox. That's not a story, that's data. The first cultures to master this, they didn't just want to remember. They needed to. They faced this basic human problem. How do you preserve what you know when your own memory is the only library, when the memories of your elders are all you have? Spoken words, they fade with the last speaker. Stories, they change with every telling, but a symbol carved into a cliff face or painted in a sealed chamber. That remains, it just waits. This was the birth of externalized memory, and it required a shift in thinking, a radical one. It meant looking at the world not just as a place to live, but as a surface to write upon. The intent wasn't personal expression, it was cultural survival. They were building a backup drive for their entire civilization. And they were using the landscape itself as the hardware. So when we find a mysterious pattern on a monument that's thousands of years old, the question changes. We're not just asking if it's beautiful, we're asking what was it meant to remember, and for whom was this message intended? That shift from memory to monument needed a principle. The most resilient systems, they all share this one idea. It's a perfect marriage of form and function. The symbol had to be beautiful, but that beauty wasn't an accident. It was a strategy for survival. Take the Egyptian obelisk, a needle of stone reaching for the sky. Its form, that sharp silhouette, was designed to catch the first and last light of the sun. A daily spectacle, but that form served a deeper function. Its four faces were canvases, carved with hieroglyphs. They recorded the deeds of a pharaoh, the laws of the land, prayers to the gods. The stone was chosen for endurance, the placement for visibility. The knowledge wasn't hidden in a vault. It was integrated into the landscape, a constant, silent teacher in the center of public life. This principle turns inert objects into active devices. Look at the Great Pyramid. Its breathtaking geometric form, the precise alignment to the cardinal directions. That's not just an architectural triumph. That form is the function. It's a massive, three-dimensional textbook on celestial mechanics. Its corridors target specific stars. Its shape mirrors sacred geometry. The whole thing acts as both an astronomical observatory and a spiritual conduit. The form and the function are inseparable. You can't understand one without the other. The pyramid isn't just a tomb, it's a frozen instruction manual. That's the first key to decode these ancient storage systems. We have to stop asking, what is this thing, and start asking, what was this thing designed to do? The answer is always written in its shape, in its material. And in its place under the sun. A single meaning is fragile. A story can be forgotten. A calendar can be replaced. So they built in a second principle, one of resilience. They never kept the most vital knowledge in just one place. They encoded it in multiple layers, like writing backup copies into the world itself. A single monument, a single symbol, could be read on many levels at once. It could be a myth, a map of the stars, a mathematical equation, and a guide for planting crops, all at the same time. If one layer faded, another might survive, preserving the core information through a different door. Take the Mesopotamian ziggurat. To the people, it was a temple, a stairway to the gods. That's the first layer, the spiritual one. But its stepped form was also the cosmic mountain, a mythological axis linking heaven and earth. That's the second layer, then, its orientation. The corners were aligned to the cardinal directions, and shadows from its tiers would mark the solstices and equinoxes on the ground. That's the third layer, a giant stone calendar, and inside, clay tablets recorded harvests, trade, and law. That's the fourth layer, the administrative heart of the city. The ziggurat wasn't just one thing, it was a multi-purpose device. If, over centuries, the myths about the cosmic mountain were lost, the building itself would still catch the sun on the longest day. The agricultural knowledge encoded in its shadows would remain. The practical function outlived the story that explained it. This is the genius of redundancy. A fail-safe system built into stone. The knowledge isn't locked behind one door with one key. It's waiting in several rooms, and if one hallway collapses, you can still find your way in through another. This turns a static object into a living puzzle with more than one solution. It ensures that even if a culture's voice grows silent, their monuments retain a whisper, a potential for rediscovery by anyone who learns to look not just at the symbol, but through it to see the many worlds it contains. Stone was the obvious choice for a message that had to outlast empires. That was the whole idea. When you carve your laws or your map of the stars into granite, you're saying something. This isn't for us, it's for whoever comes next 1,000 years from now. The stone itself becomes part of the message. It testifies to the weight of what's written on it. Choosing the right material was the first step. It was engineering for eternity. They thought like archivists. They matched the medium to the message. For the core truths, the things that defined reality for them, they used the most permanent substance they could find. Hard rock, granite, basalt. That was their read-only memory. Once it was carved, it couldn't be changed. The Rosetta Stone, for example, it's granodiorite. Its surviving wasn't an archaeological accident. That was the design. The decree on it was meant to be permanent, seen by future generations exactly as written. The stone made sure of that, but not everything needed that kind of permanence. A ceremonial calendar on wood, ritual instructions woven into cloth, those used more perishable stuff. That knowledge was vital, but it was immediate. Cyclical, it lived with the community. It might be repainted or rewoven as part of the practice. The medium there was part of the ritual's life, not a fight against time. Then you had materials that balanced durability with function. The Inca quipu, these knotted cords made from cotton or wool. They weren't stone, but they were resilient. Their genius was portability, complexity. A quipu could be carried by a runner across the empire. It recorded tax data, census counts, histories, a code of knots and colors and positions. The material was light but long-lasting, perfect for the administrative needs of a sprawling empire. It was a flexible data network made of string, so the material tells you a lot. Was this knowledge meant to be eternal, or was it meant to be used, a central pillar for all to see, or a tool for a select few? The choice whispers the intention. A massive stone stele in a city square shouts to the centuries. A delicate bark paper codex speaks of knowledge that's copied, passed hand to hand. Each material set a different clock on the information. And in doing that, these cultures understood something we still grapple with: digital preservation. They were asking the same question we ask about our cloud storage. How do we make sure this survives? Their answer was to write it on the world itself, in a language the elements would hesitate to erase. The Nile carved a valley, but it also carved a civilization. A civilization built on eternal memory. So you look at Egypt, the written word there wasn't just a tool, it was a divine technology, and the hieroglyphs show this. They're a visual storage system working on 3 levels. A symbol could be a logogram, a whole word. It could be a syllabic sign for a sound, and some glyphs were alphabetic letters. That gave scribes flexibility. They could write poetically or precisely for a tax receipt, but the real power went beyond grammar. Each carved glyph held a force, heka, often called magic, but it was deeper. It was the creative power of the spoken word made permanent. To write a name was to summon its essence, to fix it in reality. To inscribe a prayer was to make it eternally true. So writing was an act of creation and preservation, a sacred duty, and this belief transformed things. Tombs and temples became functional databanks. The walls of a pharaoh's burial chamber, like Tutankhamun's, weren't decorations. They were operational manuals for the afterlife. Storing spells for the underworld, maps of celestial realms, the moral codes for judgment. The knowledge wasn't just recorded, it was activated by the carving. This created a stable, centuries-spanning visual lexicon. Symbols carried consistent meanings. The scarab beetle pushing the sun was forever the glyph for transformation and rebirth. The Eye of Horus wasn't just a picture, it was a unit of measurement, a symbol of royal power, a shield against harm. That consistency meant a priest from the time of the pyramids could, in principle, read a text from a temple built 1,000 years later. The visual language was an unbroken thread, and while the deepest mysteries were for the initiated, the system was the backbone of all cultural continuity. The principles of Mat, the cosmic order of truth and balance, were literally set in stone on temple walls. They were the operating system of the civilization, visible to all. Every time a farmer saw a carving of the pharaoh making an offering to the gods, he was seeing a lesson in maintaining universal harmony. The hieroglyphs ensured the core software of the culture would outlast dynasties. Speaking silently from the walls long after the voices that carved them were gone, they turned knowledge into architecture, and architecture into a perpetual, divine whisper. The Egyptian model was monumental, built for the gods and the state, but for the everyday machinery of an empire you needed something smaller, more personal. And that's where you find a different kind of genius, in the hands of a Mesopotamian merchant or a tax collector, a temple priest, a tiny cylinder of stone about the size of your thumb. That was the cylinder seal. It was a portable archive, a personal signature, a legal document, all in one. The principle was simple. You carve a detailed scene into the curved surface of a hard stone. Then you roll it across soft clay, on a tablet or over the seal on a storage jar, and it leaves a continuous raised impression, a miniature frieze. That impression was unique. It was yours. It couldn't be copied without the original cylinder. It transformed a blank piece of clay into a certified record instantly. The ancient world's version of a digital signature, a tamper-proof log. Think of the knowledge it stored. One impression could tell you who owned the grain in a jar. It could seal the terms of a trade agreement between cities, authorize a payment from the temple treasury. The seal didn't just mark ownership, it enacted it. Made an agreement official, the knowledge was transactional, legal, administrative, the data backbone of the first complex economies. But there's another layer. The scenes carved into these seals weren't random. They were dense with meaning. You'd see the hero Gilgamesh grappling with mythical beasts, a worshipper led before a seated god. Sacred trees, temples, processions. These weren't just pretty pictures, they were a visual code. By choosing a scene of a god granting authority, a merchant was encoding a divine sanction over his business. A scene of a heroic battle might symbolize protection or lawful victory. The seal stored societal values and religious beliefs right alongside the inventory list. And because these seals traveled, they became agents of cultural standardization. A merchant from doing business in far-off Anatolia would roll out his seal. The local official might not speak his language, but he could read the symbols. The visual language of power, divinity, and contract became a shared code across empires. The cylinder seal was a dynamic archive. It didn't sit on a wall waiting to be read. It moved. It created copies of itself everywhere it went, spreading its encoded world-view one clay tablet at a time. Each cylinder was a unique key, and its impression was a locked record. It shows a shift in thinking, from knowledge stored for eternity in a single, fixed place, to knowledge that was replicated, verified, and put to work in the flow of daily life. Data preservation made personal, practical, and powerful. The monument spoke to the centuries. The seal spoke to the moment and made that moment permanent. The stone of the pharaoh declared power. The merchant's clay seal was for commerce, but in the north, with the deep fjords and long winters, there was another kind of stone. It spoke of a journey ending, of claiming land, of a name that couldn't be forgotten, the Norse Runestone. It shows how one monument could be a node in a living memory network. They weren't put in temples, they were planted right into the soil, beside a road, next to a burial mound. Their purpose was immediate, personal, to remember someone who died. But in doing that, they stored vital knowledge for the community left behind. The inscription followed a formula. It started with who raised the stone. A grieving wife, a son, a brother. Then it named the one remembered, and it detailed their relationship, their deeds, their character. A stone might say, Gunnar raised this stone for his father, Bjorn, a good farmer and brave traveler who died in the east. That simple statement is a data packet, a legal record of inheritance proving Gunnar's right to the farm, a historical record of trade routes east. A social record defining Bjorn's standing for all who passed. The stone was a public ledger of lineage. It anchored a family's story and their claim to the land in physical form. But the medium was believed to be active. The runes of the Futhok weren't just letters, they were channels of inherent power. To carve them into stone was to activate that power. To fix the truth of the inscription into the world, to make the memory as enduring as the granite. That belief turned the runestone from a marker into a functional device. A memorial that actively fought oblivion. It served the living by settling property disputes before they started. It guided travelers by marking routes. And it connected the present to the ancestral past, a visible point between the living and those who came before. That's where the network emerges. A single runestone is a statement. But placed at a crossroads or burial site, it becomes part of a system. These stones weren't isolated. They formed a map, a landscape dotted with data nodes. Each one telling a piece of a family's story, marking a boundary, commemorating a loss. To travel through Scandinavia then was to walk through a countryside that literally spoke. The path became a narrative, stories of heroism, hardship, lineage rising from the earth at intervals. This networked the knowledge. It made the people's history inseparable from the land. The practical information of ownership and the deeper knowledge of fate and honor were stored in the same symbol, in the same place, for anyone who knew the runes. It was a decentralized, resilient archive, a society backing up its most important data: who they were, what they owned, what they valued, not in a library but in the ground beneath their feet. Each stone a silent sentinel, ensuring a name and the story attached to it would echo long after the longhouse fire went cold. A map doesn't have to be something drawn on a surface. It can be a story you move through. That's the idea of the Songline. Across Australia for thousands and thousands of years, knowledge of the continent wasn't kept in libraries. It wasn't carved into stone. It was held in a living system woven right into the land itself, a cartography of memory where the map is sung, where the symbols are danced. And the archive is the ground beneath your feet. It starts with a dreaming, which isn't a past event. It's a continuous reality. where ancestral beings moved across a formless world and sang it into existence. With each step, they created a feature, a river here, a mountain there, a waterhole, a stand of trees. Their journeys left tracks, physical and spiritual. And the songs they sang as they traveled, those songs describe every detail of that creation path. So to know the song is to know the landscape. It is the landscape translated into rhythm and verse. Then you have the visual symbols, the intricate dot patterns, the flowing lines, the animal figures in ancient rock art across the continent. These aren't random decorations. They're mnemonic anchors. A pattern of concentric circles might mean a waterhole, a sacred meeting place. A series of lines could chart a river's path. A mountain range. These symbols act as visual prompts, like chapter headings in a massive, unwritten book. An elder points to a painting and begins the song. And the symbol unlocks the entire segment of the songline. It recalls the story of the ancestral being who formed that place, the laws established there. The resources available, the correct way to travel through it. The knowledge in this system is immense, and it's practical. A single songline is a navigational chart of astonishing accuracy. It lets people traverse hundreds of miles through desert and forest by recalling the sequence of landmarks in song. It's an ecological database, encoding the seasonal behaviors of animals. The flowering times of plants, the location of permanent water. It's a legal and moral constitution, embedding the protocols for how to interact with the land. With other groups, with the sacred sites along the route. All of this is stored in a distributed network. The hard drive is the continent itself, marked with natural features and rock art. The software is the performed culture, the songs, the stories, the dances carried in the minds and voices of the people. It's a system of extraordinary resilience. Because the knowledge is duplicated in multiple forms, in the land, in the art, in the song, in the ceremony. It can survive even if one element is lost. If a rock painting fades, the song remains. If a song is forgotten for a time, the landscape itself can help recall it. The information is never in just one vulnerable place. This turns travel into an act of recitation. To journey along a songline is to sing the world into being again, to reaffirm the connection between the people and the creation. Each performance is a data retrieval, a reaffirmation of law, and a spiritual practice all at once. The visual symbols in the sand or on the rock, they're the user interface for this vast, ancient database. They remind us that the most durable storage system might not fight against time, but move with it, keeping knowledge alive not in inert stone alone, but in the living breath of a culture walking its eternal paths. But if your archive had to move, not just from one person to the next, but across cities, from a temple to a market square. In Mesoamerica, they had an answer, a technology of real elegance, the painted book, a screenfold codex made from long strips, deerskin or bark paper, folded like an accordion. These weren't just books, they were portable worlds. Each page was dense, vivid color, intricate glyphs. It held the operating system of a civilization in a form you could hold. The Maya and Aztec codices, they were masterpieces of data compression. They had to be. They were encoding cycles of time across centuries, the movement of planets. The genealogy of kings, the exact rituals for every single day of the sacred year. The Dresden Codex, one of the few that survived. It has Venus tables of staggering accuracy. The Maya tracked Venus, the 584-day cycle of the morning and evening star, with a precision that rivals modern astronomy, because its appearance dictated the timing of war. Of coronations, of major ceremonies, this wasn't abstract. It was a practical, visual schedule, painted in red and black, telling the priest-king when the cosmos was aligned for action. The system worked through precise pictograms and a complex, interlocking calendar. The Tes Olcan, the 260-day sacred round, and the Hob, the 365-day solar year. They meshed like gears, creating a larger cycle of 52 years, so a single glyph could pinpoint a date, an event, and its divine meaning. A painting of a king ascending a temple on a specific date stored historical fact, political legitimacy, and a religious mandate all in one image. The visual symbolism directly governed the rhythm of society. You could open a codex and see, mapped in pictures, which gods held sway that week, what ceremonies were required, what omens to watch for. These books were active, sacred tools, consulted before planting, before battle, before any major civic decision. A priest would unfold the long screenfold across a table, reading the painted prophecies and histories. It was a portable library, but also a kind of interactive device. The user didn't just receive information. They engaged in a dialogue with the symbols, interpreting layers of meaning to guide the present. The codex connected the ruler to the ancestors and to the gods. It made the vast, intimidating scale of cosmic time something manageable, something you could literally page through. Their physical form was part of their resilience. The bark paper, treated with a lime plaster coating, created a brilliant white surface for the paints. The folding format protected the inner pages, and the knowledge system itself was so embedded in the culture's worldview that even after many of the physical books were lost, the underlying principles survived. The calendar, the glyphs on monuments, the oral traditions kept the core of the system alive in fragments. The codex shows us the peak of portable, visual data storage in the ancient world. It took the monumental knowledge of the stars and the stones and made it tactical, immediate, and breathtakingly beautiful, a whole civilization's sense of time and destiny folded into something that could fit under your arm. Geometry is older than words. Before stories, before names, there were shapes, the perfect circle, the triangle. These weren't just pictures, they held something more universal. They stored knowledge, but not about events, about principles, the rules of harmony, balance, cosmic order. Take the Parthenon in Athens. Its power isn't just the statues. It's in the silent math of its form. The architects used a specific proportion, the golden ratio. You find it in seashells, in flower petals. They used it to set the building's width against its height. The spacing between the columns, to stand there was to feel a deep sense of rightness, instinctual, that feeling that was the knowledge. The building was a lesson. A three-dimensional lesson in the ideal of perfect harmony. It held the belief that beauty, that truth, are rooted in mathematical law, that human creation could mirror a divine order. This wasn't decoration, it was doctrine, written in stone and proportion. Then look east to the mandala, a Sanskrit word for circle, but it's a universe in a diagram. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, these designs are precise maps, guides to the architecture of enlightenment. At the center, a point of unity, the seed of consciousness. And radiating out from it, geometric palaces, gates, deities, all in perfect symmetry. To create one or to meditate on one is to navigate an inner landscape. The symmetry stores the path to focus, the stages of moving from the chaos outside to the stillness at the center. Every line means something. Every color about the nature of reality and the mind's journey through it. You don't read this knowledge, you experience it. The pattern becomes a tool. A tool for transformation, a visual storage device for a process words could never fully hold. This idea finds another expression in the tile work of the Islamic world. You walk into a medieval mosque and the walls, they dissolve into infinite patterns, interlocking stars, weaving polygons, arabesques that flow without a beginning, without an end. This is tessellation, a single, simple tile shape repeated under strict geometric rules, generates this overwhelming complexity. The beauty is clear. But the function is profound. These patterns express a core principle, the unity of all creation, emerging from a single, divine source. The repetition avoids showing living forms. It focuses on the abstract, the infinite nature of the divine. The symmetry reflects a universe of balance, of order, and the fact that the pattern can repeat forever, that your eye is led on a journey without end that stores the concept of infinity itself. It's mathematics made visible, philosophy rendered as art. A worshipper surrounded by those walls is immersed in a silent sermon, a sermon about the underlying structure of everything. So what were these cultures doing? They were using geometry as a direct line to fundamental truth. A triangle is stable, a spiral suggests growth. Symmetry implies balance. These are concepts anyone, in any time, can grasp intuitively. By encoding their deepest understandings into these pure forms, understandings of cosmology, philosophy, spirituality, they created a storage system. A system that could bypass language, bypass culture, even bypass time. The knowledge wasn't about a specific king or a particular battle. It was about the fabric of reality itself. The geometric symbol becomes a key, not to a historical event but to a state of understanding. It asks you not to remember a story but to recognize a principle. A principle written into the bones of the world. In the silent eloquence of a circle, they found a way to speak across millennia about the eternal. The circle is a shape that feels eternal, but the sun moves and it writes time across the earth. To capture that, people built machines out of stone and shadow. They made entire landscapes into clocks. It's a form of storage, the sky's schedule written in light. Take Stonehenge, those huge stone doorways aren't random. They frame the sunrise on the longest day of summer. The light goes right to the center. It's a spectacle, but it's also a signal. The monument stores the knowledge of the year's turning point. It marks a date without writing anything down. It's a calendar that never needs resetting. Its mechanism is the orbit of the planet. This idea shows up everywhere. In Ireland, there's Newgrange. It's older than the pyramids. For most of the year, the chamber inside is completely dark. But at dawn on the winter solstice, a thin beam of sun travels down a long passage. It lights up a carved spiral inside the tomb. The shortest day gets a burst of light in the deepest dark. That wasn't an accident. It was a statement built into the architecture. It stored the knowledge that the sun would return. It connected the ancestors in the mound to the idea of rebirth. In Egypt, the Temple of Karnak takes this further. Its axis was aligned so that on the winter solstice, sunlight would travel the full length of the hall, all the way to the inner sanctuary, to the statue of the god. The god was united with the sun's power on that day. The temple itself was a timekeeping device. It aligned ritual with the sky. Maybe the most elegant example is the sun dagger in the American Southwest. The ancestral Pueblones used a natural rock face. They carved spirals into the cliff. Then they positioned two large stone slabs so that slivers of sunlight, like daggers, would fall across the carvings. On the summer solstice, one dagger of light cuts right through the center of a spiral. On the equinox, a dagger frames it. The art and the sun's movement together make a calendar. The knowledge of the seasons is stored in that interaction between a fixed symbol and the moving light. So what were they storing? First, survival. Knowing the solstice meant knowing when to plant and harvest. It was crucial agricultural data. It meant food. Second, they stored order. By tying their biggest structures to the heavens, they showed that human life was part of a larger pattern. The universe had rules and they had learned to read them. That knowledge provided stability, a way to navigate time. These structures didn't need a priest to interpret a scroll. No elder to recite a song. The knowledge played out year after year in a silent display. Anyone there on that day would see the alignment happen. The data was self-validating. It turned celestial cycles into a shared experience. A community could gather and watch their calendar, their connection to the cosmos, light up before them. The stone held the question, and once a year the sun gave the answer. A story carved into a pot can't be lost. Myths aren't just stories, they're the original data structures. The foundational code, and ancient artists took these sprawling narratives and turned them into compact symbols, archetypes. A single repeated image could call up an entire universe of meaning. It stored the myth's wisdom in a form that was instantly recognizable, deeply resonant. Look at a Greek vase from 2,500 years ago. You see Atlas, muscles straining, holding the celestial sphere. That's not just a picture of a strong man, it's a data packet. It contains the whole story. Divine rebellion, cosmic order. It stores the idea of a burdensome responsibility, a structure that holds reality together. Anyone in that culture would see that image and unpack layers of understanding. The weight of duty, the stability of the world, the consequences of challenging the gods. This visual shorthand had a critical function. Before widespread literacy, the oral tradition was the primary library. But stories evolve with every telling, details shift, priorities change. The visual archetype acted as a check, a fixed reference point, stamping the image of Gilgamesh wrestling the lion onto cylinder seals. Painting Heracles battling the Hydra on temple walls. The culture was creating distributed backups. Each depiction was a save point, ensuring the core narrative remained consistent. And more importantly, its underlying message about mastering chaotic forces. The art wasn't illustrating the myth, it was encoding it. These archetypes stored different kinds of vital knowledge. The Mesopotamian lion, a symbol of raw, untamed power confronted by the civilized hero. That repeated scene on palace reliefs wasn't just royal propaganda. It was a societal lesson about the constant struggle to maintain order against the chaos of the wild, of disease, of external threats. It reinforced a core value. The Egyptian goddess Mat, depicted with a single ostrich feather. She was the living glyph for truth, balance, cosmic law. Her image in tombs and temples stored the entire moral and legal framework. To see her was to remember the principle that held the universe together. This system turned art into a mnemonic network. A potter painting a scene from the Odyssey wasn't just decorating a vessel. He was installing cultural software onto an everyday object. As that pot moved from a workshop to a home to a marketplace, the story traveled with it. The image on a drinking cup might show Odin, sacrificing his eye for wisdom at the well of Mimir. In the flicker of firelight, a storyteller could point to that image and begin the tale. The visual symbol guaranteed the key elements remained intact. The myth stored in the symbol became a tool for teaching ethics, history, the nature of the divine. What survives in these archetypes is the distilled essence, the hero's journey, the trickster's lesson, the price of knowledge. By repeatedly returning to these forms, cultures performed a kind of collective data maintenance. They were ensuring the most important programs didn't corrupt over time. The stories that defined who they were, how the world worked, how to behave within it. The image on the seal, the statue in the niche, the mosaic on the floor, they all whispered the same foundational truths. Keeping the myth alive wasn't about preserving entertainment. It was about preserving the operating instructions for reality itself, one enduring symbol at a time. The lion means power, the bird is freedom, but a lion with a king's head, that's different. It becomes something else, an animal symbol turning into a new kind of structure, the hybrid. A sphinx isn't a real animal, it's built on purpose, a lion's body for strength. A human head for intelligence, sometimes hawk's wings for a divine view. The Egyptians put them at temple entrances, at tombs. They were guardians, but they were also an instruction. To pass here, you needed a lion's strength, human wisdom, a god's perspective. The symbol held the entry criteria. It stored the idea of royal and priestly authority in one form. That principle of combination, it made the strongest visual shorthand. Every culture built its own ideal composite. encoding its deepest values. In China, the dragon was the ultimate hybrid. It had deer horns, a camel's head, demon eyes, a snake's neck, the belly of a clam, carp scales, eagle claws, tiger paws, ox ears. This wasn't a chaos monster. It was a precise diagram, a diagram of cosmic harmony, gathering every major animal's attribute, symbolizing mastery over all realms. It stored imperial authority as a benevolent, ordering force. The emperor was the dragon's human form. To see the dragon was to understand the whole philosophy, balanced celestial power. Then there's the feathered serpent. Quetzalcoatl, the name itself is a compound. Quetzal, the resplendent bird, long green feathers, the sky. Coatl, the serpent, the earth. The symbol is the union. A serpent's body covered in bird feathers. It's a walking equation, earth plus sky, material reality plus spiritual aspiration, but it stored more. Quetzalcoatl was also god of wind, of dawn, of priests, of knowledge, of creation. One symbol held all that. For a farmer on a temple wall, it meant rain and fertility. For a priest, it charted a path to enlightenment. For a ruler, it legitimized being a bridge between worlds. The image was a dense, multi-layered file. Opening it revealed different data depending on who looked. Why did this work for long-term storage? Because the hybrid is memorable. It breaks nature's expected pattern. Our minds latch onto the anomaly. A winged bull from Assyria, a griffin lion's body, eagle's head, the centaur half man, half horse. Each combination was a deliberate choice. Wings added speed, divinity, transcendence. Multiple heads, like Cerberus the three-headed dog, conveyed omnipresence. Guarding multiple thresholds, the attributes were modular. You could mix and match to create new meanings within a shared language. When people saw the carved feathered serpent, they didn't need a written treatise on cosmology. The symbol triggered a cascade of ideas: duality, balance, the cycle of shedding skin for renewal, the connection between crawling earth and soaring heavens. It was a cognitive shortcut to a whole worldview. These creatures became anchors for oral traditions, for rituals, for social structures, stable reference points in a flowing sea of stories. The dragon, the sphinx, they could survive political collapse, linguistic change, even new religions, carrying fragments of old meaning forward. They weren't just art. They were the original emojis, condensed packets of cultural data, loaded with associative meaning, designed for maximum efficiency in storage, for instant recall across generations. They turned the impossible creature into the most reliable messenger. The most important knowledge wasn't something you just saw, it was something you touched. Something you wore or held or performed. A crown isn't just metal, a mask isn't just wood. In a ritual space, every object becomes a kind of living file. Its shape, the material, the symbols on it, that's a language, a visual and physical language, and that language stores the instructions for the ceremony. That makes the ritual leader an operator, and the ritual itself becomes a process of accessing stored data. Take a shaman's mask from the Pacific Northwest. Cedar inlaid with a balloon shell. It's not a disguise, it's an interface. The specific animal features: a bear's jaw, an eagle's beak, a whale's fin. Those aren't decoration. They're access keys. Each one connects the wearer to a different layer of the spirit world, to a specific kind of power or ancestral knowledge. Putting on the mask is like logging into that system. The act of wearing it changes how you move, how you sound, your presence. The object encodes the protocol for the transformation. This idea finds its most elegant form in the Lukasa, the memory board of the Luba people. At first glance, it looks like a wooden plank with beads and shells, but it's a sophisticated, tactile database. Each bead, each shell is carefully placed. Its color, its size, its position relative to others, all of that holds specific, non-linear information. One cluster might map the kingdom's migration routes. Another might encode the complex genealogy of the royal line, going back generations. A third could hold territorial boundaries or sacred sites. The board is meaningless without its operator, the Mwanahiti, a specialist trained in its language. To read the Lukasa, the expert doesn't just look, they touch it. Their fingers trace the paths between beads, feeling the contours. That physical interaction is crucial. It aids memory, turning recitation into a kinesthetic act. The ceremony of recounting history becomes an interactive data retrieval process. The board stores the information, and the human touch, guided by training, executes the query. This shows a deep understanding of memory. Knowledge isn't just a list to recall, it's a landscape to navigate. The Lukasa makes that landscape physical. It externalizes a mental map. It turns abstract history into something you can feel. The ritual of using it ensures the data is passed down with high fidelity because the method of access is tied to the information itself. You can't have the story without the board and the trained hands to trace its paths. From the beaded Lukasa to the gold-encrusted crown of a Byzantine emperor, these ritual objects function as hardware. The crown's specific gems and enamel images aren't just displays of wealth. They're a visual contract. They encode the ruler's divine right, his connection to saints and apostles, his role as both military leader and spiritual shepherd. To see the crown was to instantly read the job description and the source of authority. The object stored the constitution of the state in a form that could be worn. So when we see these artifacts in a museum case, we're only seeing half of the technology. The other half was the performance, the act of placing the crown on a head. The dance performed in the mask, the fingers moving across the memory board. The object held the code, the ritual ran the program. Together, they formed a complete system for preserving and activating the most delicate, most essential knowledge a culture possessed: how to properly speak to the gods, how to remember who you are, and how to perform the ceremonies that hold time itself together. A city can be a story in stone and street, but some cities were built as symbols. They were designed as storage devices. Their layout, their orientation, that was the operating manual. To walk the streets was to walk through a diagram of cosmic order and social law. There's Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley. Its design is encoded knowledge. The streets run in a precise grid. That was a radical idea for its time, and it wasn't just neat. It stored a principle: equality, efficient organization. The grid treats all directions as equal. It suggests a society less focused on a single central power, but the real genius is underneath. An advanced drainage system runs below those straight streets. Every house connected to it, that infrastructure stored knowledge of public health, of engineering, of communal responsibility. The city's form preached a silent sermon. Order, cleanliness, collective well-being. The citizen, just by living in a clean house on a straight street, was participating in that, reinforcing that stored knowledge every day. Then you have Chinese imperial cities. They took this blueprint to a celestial level. They were planned as microcosms, small models of the cosmos. The capital was a mirror of heavenly order. Think of ancient Beijing under the Ming. The city was a nested series of square walls. The forbidden city, the palace, sat at the exact center that symbolized the emperor as the pivot of the world. Major temples were placed at precise points: the Temple of Heaven to the south, the Temple of Earth to the north. This wasn't just zoning, it was a cosmological map made real. The north-south axis of the city mirrored the axis of the world. The gates, the walls, the procession routes, all aligned to directions with spiritual meaning. So every bureaucrat traveling to the palace, every farmer entering the gate, was moving through a landscape of meaning. They were absorbing a lesson. The universe had a center, a harmonious structure, and their society, reflected in the city's geometry, was part of that natural order. The city stored hierarchy, balance, celestial mandate in its pavement. You didn't need to read a philosophy text. You just looked at the north-south avenue leading to the Emperor's Gate. The urban plan did the teaching. This symbolism turns the city into the ultimate monument. Not a static statue, a living, functional archive. Its knowledge isn't locked away, it's operational. The drainage of Mohenjo-Daro worked, the aligned processions in Beijing functioned. The stored knowledge was validated by success, by stability. When the streets are clean, the lesson of public health is proven. When the empire is stable, the cosmological blueprint feels sanctioned. The citizen becomes both user and curator of this storage device. By living within its patterns, by following its implicit rules, they keep the knowledge alive. They perform the data, so the city is more than buildings. It's a civilization's mind made physical, a permanent, inhabited symbol, ensuring that with every step, its people walk the path of their own deepest principles. Repetition is a rhythm. It's something the mind can't forget. It's the beat that holds a song together. And in the ancient world, this simple idea became a storage technology. They didn't just repeat a symbol, they wove it into a pattern so hypnotic, so interlocking, it became a trap for memory, the Celtic endless knot. A single line, looping and crossing itself, no beginning, no end. To trace it with your eye is to perform a meditation. It forces focus, and in that focus it stores an idea. The idea of eternity, of interconnectedness, that all things are linked in a continuous cycle. The pattern isn't just decoration on a stone cross or a piece of jewelry. It's a cognitive tool. By following its path, you internalize its message. You remember the concept it encodes, because the act of looking is the act of learning. This same principle echoes in the Greek key pattern, the meander, a line that turns back on itself in a relentless, right-angled rhythm. It was named for the winding Meander River. But its function was memory, framing a vase or running along a temple frieze. Its predictable progression symbolized the river of life, the eternal flow. For a society that relied on oral poets to recite epics, these visual rhythms provided a mental anchor. The repetitive border on a cup could help a storyteller recall the meter of a verse. The sequence of a genealogy, the pattern stored the feeling of continuity, which triggered the memory of the specific knowledge tied to it, and perhaps this is most tangible in the textiles of the Andes. For cultures like the Inca, weaving was mathematics, it was philosophy, it was history. A single blanket could tell the story of a community. The repetitive motifs, stylized condors, stepped mountains, concentric diamonds, were not arbitrary. Each was a glyph, woven in a specific sequence. They could map territories, record astronomical events, encode moral teachings. The very process of creation was the storage process. A weaver, following the pattern passed down from her mother, was threading knowledge into existence. The repetitive act of tying each knot reinforced the information. The textile became a tactile, visual record. You could wrap yourself in the knowledge of your ancestors. The pattern, through its repetition, made the abstract concrete. It turned the concept of community into something you could touch, the path of the sun into something you could see every day. This is the mnemonic power of pattern. It leverages how our brains work. Repetition creates neural pathways. A complex idea attached to a simple, repeating visual rhythm becomes easier to recall. The meander on a pot whispers about the unending journey. The woven diamond on a poncho speaks of the mountains surrounding the village. The endless knot on a manuscript page reminds the reader of bonds that stretch beyond a single life. For oral cultures, these patterns were more than art. They were the user interface for a vast library of unwritten law and lore. An elder could point to a specific repetitive motif on a ceremonial garment and begin the associated story. The pattern was the prompt. The consistent, repeated symbol ensured the story began the same way every time, preserving its core structure. The knowledge wasn't just stored in the object. It was stored in the relationship between the object and the mind trained to read it. The hypnotic design made it unforgettable. It embedded the deepest principles of a culture, infinity, connection, cycle, into the fabric of daily life. So the lesson was learned not by study but by repeated exposure. Every glance at a patterned wall, every use of a decorated bowl, it was a gentle, silent reinforcement. A way of making sure the most important ideas were not just heard but woven into the soul. Green was a color, but it was more than that. It was life coming up from the river. In those old cultures, color was a language, a precise one. Each shade meant something specific. It held information about the world, about the gods, about where people stood. The palette was like a data set, and if you knew the code, you could read a deeper message. In Egypt, this was tied to the land itself. Their word for green waj, that was also the word for papyrus. For flourishing, it was the color of Osiris, the god of resurrection. In tombs, his skin was painted green, so that one shade stored the whole idea of rebirth. And black chem, that wasn't emptiness, it was potential. It was the fertile silt from the Nile flood, the black earth everything grew from. So painting a pharaoh's statue with black skin connected him to that power. To the land's ability to regenerate. These weren't random choices, they were selections from a symbolic menu, encoding ideas about eternity, about order, into every surface. This system reached a high point with the Maya and their blue. This wasn't just any blue, it was a vivid turquoise-like color, astonishingly durable. Resistant to weather, they think it was made through a ritual mixing indigo with a sacred clay. The color was tied to the rain gods like chalk. It became a visual prayer for water. But it had a duality. That same sacred blue was used to cover things for sacrifice, offerings and victims. The color stored the idea of what was precious. What was vital was also what was most sacred to give. The rarity of the materials added meaning. Lapis lazuli from far away, cinnabar for red. The color itself spoke of wealth, of trade networks, of the value placed on the message. By standardizing these associations, on murals, on clothing, in books, a culture built a visual library. You could look at a fresco and know a figure's status from their robe's color. A deity's domain was announced by their hue. A pot's colors could tell you its ritual purpose. The system stored environmental knowledge, yellow for maize for sustenance, white for bones for ancestors. It stored social structure, purple from sea snails, maybe just for emperors. So to decode the colors on an artifact is to tap into a silent frequency of its data. It shows you attitudes that text might miss. The ochres and reds in an Australian rock painting, they don't just show a kangaroo. They evoke the sun's heat, the red earth, the blood of the hunt, connecting the image to the memory of the place. The gold leaf in a Byzantine icon isn't just opulence. It stores a theology of divine light, turning the panel into a window. So color symbolism made art a layered transmission. The form held one piece of knowledge. The color held another, more intuitive layer. Together, they created a richer file. Even if the stories faded, the feeling of the color could persist. The hope in green, the authority in purple, the sanctity in blue, whispering a culture's deepest priorities in a language you feel before you understand. The color on a pot fades, a monument stone erodes, but if the canvas was the earth itself, if the symbol was so large you had to walk for miles just to see its shape. That's the final step, when a culture stops putting knowledge onto objects and starts writing it directly into the ground. The landscape becomes the interface. And what's stored there isn't just a record, it becomes a permanent part of home. The Nazca lines in Peru, they're the famous one. Across this high desert plateau, lines go for miles. They make these perfect geometric shapes, triangles, trapezoids, spirals, and then the big figures, a hummingbird with a very long, thin beak, a spider with one leg elegantly curved. A monkey with a coiled tail, they're not small, they're hundreds of feet across, and from the ground you can't see them, you just see a shallow trench. A path of clear, dark stones against the lighter earth. The full design only shows itself from a vantage point high above. For a culture without flight, that's the puzzle. It means the knowledge was for other viewers, maybe the gods looking down from the sky, or maybe the act of making it was the point, the ritual of walking the lines, maintaining them generation after generation. That was the storage. The knowledge was in the doing. Scholars debate the purpose. Were they ritual pathways where walking the line of the condor connected you to its spirit? Or giant astronomical markers, aligning with the solstice sun or pointing to distant water in the arid mountains? The compelling idea is they encoded all of it. The hummingbird, a pollinator linked to life and water. The spider may be a symbol for rain. The lines themselves often lead to sources of water, so the desert floor became a sacred map. A map that stored hydrological knowledge where to find water, and cosmological knowledge when to celebrate its return. In one inscription, it turned survival data into a spiritual landscape. A similar thing happens with the earthworks in North America. The Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. It winds for over a quarter of a mile. Its body undulates, ending in a coiled tail and an open mouth that seems to hold an egg. It's a sculpture made of earth, and it's aligned. The serpent's head points to the setting sun on the summer solstice. The coils might align with other solar events like the equinoxes. This isn't a random shape, it's a clock, a calendar, a myth written in grass and soil. The knowledge of the sun's journey was stored in a form so large, so integrated with the hills, it couldn't be moved or stolen. It belonged only to that place. These projects required something profound. Generations of coordinated effort, a community agreeing century after century to maintain the lines to rebuild the mound. That made the knowledge a communal fact. It wasn't owned by a single priest or king. It was the shared work, the shared vision of the people, baked right into their territory. To know your home was to know the symbol. To live there was to live inside the message. The geoglyph tied identity directly to the land. It said, "We are the people of the spider. We are the people who follow the serpent's path. Our story isn't in a book you can burn. It's in the earth you walk upon. It is the earth you walk upon." That transforms knowledge from something you possess to something you inhabit. A permanent inscription that makes belief as tangible as the soil and as enduring as the horizon. A symbol carved to last forever still faces time, and the great irony is the system works too well. The stone endures, but what it means can fade. The pattern stays, but we lose the key to read it. Time and erosion, and the slow forgetting that comes after cultures change, they corrupt the old data. We become like archaeologists, trying to recover files from a broken ancient drive with no manual. The Rosetta Stone was that miracle find because it was the key. It gave us a direct translation from known Greek into unknown Egyptian scripts. It was the manual. But for most symbols, we don't have that. We have fragments and the slow work of interpretation. We use comparative mythology, looking at how a similar symbol shows up somewhere else. We use contextual archaeology, studying what was buried with the carving, tools or bones or offerings to guess its purpose. And sometimes, if we're lucky, there's a living tradition. Where the knowledge was passed down, unbroken, that gives us a glimpse into how the symbols were once understood. And that's the reminder, storing knowledge is only half of it. Keeping the key alive, the cultural context, the living thread of meaning, that's just as critical. It feels like a modern lesson. Our own digital archivists face the same ghost. They're trying to save files from just decades ago, written in software nothing can now read. The data is on the disk, but the language to open it is gone. We could face a digital dark age unless we make a point to save the keys. So when we look at a strange glyph on a temple wall, it's not just a puzzle from the past. It's a universal truth, a message, no matter how permanent, is only as eternal as the shared understanding needed to hear it. The toughest storage system in the world can't save a secret if everyone who knew the password has died. And that means deciphering these symbols, it's more than historical curiosity. It's a race against a second kind of decay, the decay of memory itself. A spiral is never just a line. It's a path that pulls you in or pushes you out in a continuous turn, and you find this shape carved into a Neolithic tomb in Ireland. Painted on a pot from the American Southwest, etched into skin as a Maori tattoo, these cultures were separated by oceans by thousands of years, no possible contact. Yet each one chose that coil to hold meaning. Often it meant a journey, the journey of life or the soul or the turning seasons, a symbol for growth. For cosmic energy swirling into being, this isn't an isolated case. Take the tree of life, its roots digging deep, its branches reaching high, connecting earth to sky. You see it on Assyrian palace walls, on Scandinavian runestones, in the sacred art of the Maya, a symbol of connection, of lineage, of the axis that holds all worlds together. So what do these echoes mean? When the same visual solution appears in distant corners of the world, are we seeing fragments of a lost language, or something deeper about how the mind builds symbols? One possibility is shared cognitive architecture. Our brains are wired to recognize patterns, to see agency in the world, to understand growth through metaphors like a branching tree or an unfolding spiral. When faced with storing a concept like the soul's journey, the spiral is a natural, intuitive choice. It visually represents a path that isn't linear. That returns upon itself but still moves forward. It's an independent invention, born from similar mental tools solving similar problems. Another thread suggests ancient, forgotten pathways. Could seafaring cultures, long before recorded history, have carried seed ideas across continents? It's a tantalizing thought. The diffusion of symbols along trade routes through shared stories is possible in some cases. But for many of these parallels, the distances and timeframes make direct contact unlikely, which leads to a third idea, perhaps more powerful, that these symbols are independent solutions to universal human questions. Every culture grapples with creation, with life and its end, with our place in the natural order. The tree is a perfect storage device for interconnection. The spiral perfectly encodes cyclical time, different cultures staring up at the same stars, feeling the same turn of the year, arrived at similar visual shorthand for the inexpressible. This comparative view changes the quest. It stops being a search for a single, original source, a mythical mother culture that invented everything. Instead, it becomes a celebration of shared ingenuity. It reveals a kind of convergent evolution in human thought. Just as wings evolved independently in birds, bats, and insects to solve flight, the tree of life motif evolved independently to solve the problem of storing cosmic unity. Looking at these parallels, then, we're not just comparing art styles, we're mapping the deep structure of human concern. We see how the need to preserve wisdom about birth, death, and the cosmos pushed different minds toward similar, elegant forms. The visual languages vary. The Celtic knot is intricate, interlaced. The Pueblo spiral is bold, elemental. But they are all trying to translate the same profound whispers into a shape that can outlast the voice. This shared project spanning the globe tells us the drive to remember, to make meaning permanent, might be the most universal human symbol of all. A symbol carved in stone is just a static. It waits, but the knowledge of how to unlock it, that's a living current. It flowed through people, through a chain of teaching, a sacred one, from a knowing mind to a receptive one. That was the transmission protocol, the essential software for the ancient hardware. The master knew what the symbol was, and also how it was used, the stories behind it. The rituals it started, the layers of meaning a casual observer would miss. The apprentice learned through immersion, through repetition, by watching the master interact with the symbols in their proper context during a ceremony, or while telling a creation myth or interpreting an omen. The visual symbol was the stable anchor, a fixed point, and around this anchor the master could weave the fluid tapestry of oral instruction. The carved spiral on the rock was permanent. But the song explaining its connection to the water cycle, the dance mimicking its turning path, the prayer invoking its power, that knowledge lived in breath and gesture. It was performed, not just recorded. This created a balanced system, but a fragile one. The stone stored the data indelibly. The human tradition provided the operating system to read it, ever updating. One without the other was incomplete. A book with no alphabet, a complex machine with a lost manual. We see this rupture with the Maya. Their glyphs are exquisite, dense. But the transmission line was severed. The Spanish conquest, the suppression of practices, the loss of life and tradition, it broke the chain. The master-apprentice lineages were disrupted. The codices burned. The living software that animated those glyphs faded. The symbols didn't become meaningless. Their beauty is still evident, but the full depth of their data, the precise ritual instructions, the nuanced wordplay, the specific references known only to the trained scribe, that layer grew silent. Now, centuries later, we have brilliant archaeologists and linguists reverse engineering that operating system, piecing the manual back together from fragments. It shows the resilience of the visual storage, that we can do this at all, but it also shows the vulnerability of a system that needs continuous cultural maintenance. This master-to-apprentice model was the heartbeat of the ancient knowledge network. It ensured fidelity. A story told around a campfire might change each time. But when that story is tied to a specific symbol on a specific temple wall, recounted by a master who learned it there from his master, the core remains true. The symbol acts as a mnemonic check. It keeps the oral tradition on track. The apprentice doesn't just memorize a list. They learn a relationship. They learn how to be with the symbol, how to let it speak through them. This transforms remembering from recall into reverence. The knowledge becomes part of the person's identity, their role. When that chain holds, the system is robust. It can adapt, adding new interpretations to old symbols while keeping the core. But when it snaps, the silence is profound. The stones remain, whispering in a language we're still struggling to fully hear. They remind us that the most advanced storage technology is only as eternal as the living breath that gives it meaning. That bitten apple on your laptop, it's a silent ambassador. No words, but it says a lot. Innovation, simplicity, a kind of rebellious creativity. It's not that different from a scarab beetle carved on an Egyptian temple. Both are compact visual packages. They're designed to trigger a cascade of associations. Our modern world is saturated with these engineered symbols. It proves the ancient impulse to store meaning in form isn't a relic. It's our most active visual language. The corporate logo is its purest commercial expression. Nike's swoosh isn't a drawing of a shoe. It's the idea of motion, of victory, of athletic aspiration, compressed into a single, fluid checkmark. It functions like an ancient glyph, a cognitive shortcut to an entire world of branded feeling and identity. We don't read it, we recognize it, and in that recognition we download the intended message. This visual shorthand expands into our daily digital conversations. Emoji have evolved into a global pictographic lexicon. A smiling face with tears of joy, a thumbs up, a red heart. These aren't mere decorations, they're efficient data packets for emotion and intent. They transcend written language barriers. They let us append tone to text, to convey sarcasm or support or celebration in a single character. In essence, we're using a system of standardized ideograms. not unlike a simplified version of the glyphs used in ancient codices to denote specific gods or concepts. The difference is one of scale and speed. Where a Maya scribe might paint a glyph for jaguar to invoke concepts of night and power, we send a cat face to convey playfulness or independence. The underlying mechanism of symbolic substitution remains strikingly similar. Perhaps the most critical modern application is in public safety, the symbols on a traffic sign or a hazardous chemical label. They're designed for universal, instantaneous comprehension. A skull and crossbones, a flame, a radiating trefoil, these communicate danger across any linguistic divide. Their effectiveness relies on the same principles that made ancient symbols resilient. They're simple, memorable. Their meaning is reinforced through consistent use and often through law. They store vital, life-preserving knowledge in a form that must be understood at a glance. Much like a ritual symbol on a temple wall stored spiritual protocols for an entire community. Seeing this continuity reframes our relationship with the past. We're not so different from the Sumerian merchant rolling his personal cylinder seal into clay. We're still seeking the most efficient way to pack complex ideas into portable, durable visual forms. Our purposes have diversified into the commercial, the social, the regulatory. But the core technology of the mind remains. We're still building a world where meaning is stored not only in words, but in shapes, in colors, in the silent eloquence of a symbol. This enduring practice reminds us that before we wrote sentences, we drew ideas, and in many ways we still do. Our archives are built on shifting sand. We generate this unimaginable volume of data, but we store it on media with a terrifyingly short shelf life. A hard drive might last a decade. A server farm needs constant power and cooling. A cloud service depends on a company that may not exist in 50 years, and our file formats become unreadable as the software changes. We're building this vast, intricate library where the books dissolve and the language to read them changes every few years. That's the fragility of the digital age. Our ancestors carved laws into granite to speak to the centuries. We save our most important records in formats that struggle to outlive a single human lifetime. That contrast is a lesson in what it means to think long-term. The ancient model of storage, multi-layered and physically durable, suddenly looks less primitive. It looks resilient. They didn't put all their knowledge in one basket. A sacred calendar was stored in the alignment of a temple, repeated in a chant, woven into a textile, painted in a codex. If one layer was lost, others preserved the core idea. Our modern approach is the opposite. We centralize. We store the sum of human knowledge on digital platforms that are marvels of efficiency, but also single points of catastrophic failure. A solar flare, a cyber attack, or just societal collapse could erase millennia of wisdom in an instant. We traded physical permanence for instant access without fully considering the trade-off. That forces a question: should we be creating physical, symbolic backups for our most crucial knowledge, not as a replacement but as a failsafe, a cultural insurance policy? Imagine encoding the principles of mathematics, physics, human rights, not just in servers but in monuments, designing structures that, like Stonehenge, store data in their form and alignment. We'd need to think like ancient scribes again. What is the most universal visual language? How do you create a symbol for the structure of DNA or the value of pi that could be understood by discoverers 5,000 years from now with no shared history or language? The challenge is immense, but the exercise itself is valuable. It shifts our perspective from the next quarterly report to the next millennium. It asks what we truly value enough to etch into the landscape of time. Is it our scientific breakthroughs, our art, the hard lessons of our history? The study of ancient symbols shows that the societies who spoke across the ages were those who made deliberate, difficult choices. They invested generations of labor to store what they believed was eternal. Our task is to decide what, from our dizzying digital abundance, deserves that same kind of eternity. And then we must have the humility to write it not in code that will be obsolete, but in forms that the sun, the stone, and the silent patience of time itself can carry forward. Deciphering a symbol isn't just translation. It can be crossing a line. When researchers from outside a culture step in to study its ancient visual codes, they're stepping into a space that's often still sacred. Still alive, the Aboriginal Songlines, for instance, they're not historical curiosities. They're a living legal system, a navigational chart, a spiritual backbone for communities right now. And the petroglyphs in the American Southwest, carved into canyon walls, they're not just art for analysis. For many native nations, they're direct communications from ancestors. They hold prayers and teachings that are still vital, so this presents a profound ethical dilemma. Who truly owns this knowledge? Is it the academic who can decode the geometric pattern? Or is it the community for whom that pattern is a living breath, a map of home? These symbols were stored for specific people, for specific sacred purposes. To treat them as public domain data, something to be extracted and published, can feel like a theft of spirit. It turns a living tradition into a dissected specimen. And the act of interpretation itself carries weight. When an outsider defines the meaning of a sacred symbol, they can unintentionally freeze it. They can strip it of its nuanced, evolving context within the community. They can impose an external narrative that drowns out the internal voice. This forces a shift in perspective. Access to ancient knowledge isn't an automatic right of discovery. It's a privilege that comes with deep responsibility. The modern challenge is to navigate a respectful path, a path that honors the global significance of these human achievements as part of our shared heritage, while fundamentally respecting the sovereignty and the spiritual beliefs and the ongoing ownership of the cultures that created them. This often means moving from a model of extraction to one of collaboration. It means researchers working with, not just on, descendant communities, seeking permission, not just access. Sharing interpretation, not just publishing conclusions. It recognizes that the deepest keys to understanding these storage systems aren't just linguistic or archaeological. They're relational, they're held in trust, so the goal shifts. It shifts from merely unlocking the past to supporting the continuity of that knowledge into the future. On terms defined by its rightful keepers, this ethical layer is now part of the decipherment process itself. It asks us to listen, not just look, to understand that some messages were never meant for everyone. And that respecting that boundary, that's a form of wisdom too. The stone has its story, and you can listen. It's not something only scholars do. You can do this detective work yourself. The next time you're in front of something old, in a museum, or even looking at a picture online, you make one shift. You stop just looking and you start asking. It begins with a single, deliberate look. You ask the object, what are you made of? The material is the first clue. Is it local clay or a stone brought from far away? That choice tells you something. It whispers about permanence, about prestige. Then you look for repetition. Is there a shape that repeats? An animal, a pattern? Repetition isn't an accident. It's a drumbeat. It means this was too important to say just once. Then look for creatures that break nature's rules. An animal with wings it shouldn't have. The head of one thing on the body of another. These hybrids are philosophy compressed. They make you ask, what qualities is this combining? Strength with wisdom. Earth with sky. Now step back. Look at the form itself. Is there a hidden geometry? Does the shape or the decoration show an awareness of the stars? A series of dots might be random, or it might chart a constellation. A line could be a border, or it could point to a solstice sunrise. This is where you touch the ancient mind. Thinking in cycles, in celestial order, look at the colors, were only certain ones used. In many cultures, color was a strict code. A specific blue might be for the divine. A certain green for life, for rebirth. The pigment held meaning as clearly as a carved line. And finally, this is the master key. Seek the story behind the symbol. A little research into the culture's myths can illuminate everything. That figure on a Greek vase isn't just a man with a club. It's Hieroglyphs. His labors are lessons about overcoming chaos. The serpent on a temple wall isn't just a snake. It's Quetzalcoatl. Its feathered body is a sentence about earth and spirit united. When you start asking these questions, something happens. The static object activates. The Parthenon isn't just beautiful ruins anymore. It becomes a stored treatise on mathematical harmony, on civic ideals. A Celtic torque, that twisted gold neck ring, stops being just jewelry. You see the endless knotwork, and it becomes an encoded symbol of eternal cycles. Of status, of a world view where everything connects. You're not a spectator anymore. You become a participant in the ancient, ongoing act of decoding. You join the line of apprentices, learning to hear the whisper in the stone, that dialogue across generations. That was the point. It wasn't just storing a calendar or a king's name. It was about weaving a single thread, an unbroken thread of meaning, from the deepest past into the far future. The symbol was the needle. The culture was the fabric. When a new generation learned to read the glyphs on the temple or to sing the song of the land, they weren't just getting information. They were taking their place in a conversation that had been going on for centuries. They were answering a call from their ancestors. A call that said, "We were here, this is what we saw as true, this is the shape we gave to our wonder," and that connection gave them something: stability. In a world of shifting seasons, uncertain harvests, kingdoms rising and falling, these enduring symbols were anchors. They said, "Our identity isn't fleeting. It's carved into the bedrock of this place. It's woven into the patterns we wear." A Roman citizen looks up at a statue of Mars, god of war, protector of the state. He isn't just seeing art, he's tapping into a shared source of strength, of civic duty. He's connecting his own courage to the foundational myth of his city. He feels part of a lineage. A Maya daykeeper priest unrolls a codex. He reads the omens for the coming year. He isn't just checking a celestial schedule. He's entering a continuous stream, a stream of cultural consciousness. He's using the same visual language, interpreting the same glyphic prophecies as priests who lived 1,000 years before him. His actions in the present are guided by a dialogue with the deep past, that long-term perspective. It stands in contrast to our moment. We live fast. Our world feels disposable. Our information is ephemeral. Trends change by the week. Our sense of history can feel compressed into a news cycle. That ancient impulse to create for the millennia, it seems almost alien now. But there's a quiet wisdom in it. It asks us to slow down, to consider scale, to think beyond our own lifespan, beyond our children's. What does it mean to build something meant to speak to people you'll never meet? In a time you can't imagine, these symbols challenge us. They sit silently in museums, on distant hillsides, and they pose a question. What visual legacy are we creating for the far future? We are creating one. Our cities, our global brands, our digital footprints, they're all forms of storage. But what's the core message we're encoding? Is it one of connection, of wisdom, a reverence for the world, or is it something else, something more fleeting? The ancient symbols remind us we're part of a longer story. We're not the first to try to speak across the ages, and if we listen to their silent, stone voices, we might learn how to make our own message worth hearing. 1,000 years from now, from hieroglyphs in Egypt to the songlines in Australia, we've been following a trail of silent messages, and what you see is that a culture's deepest truths weren't left to chance. They were encoded on purpose, carved right into the bones of the world, into stone, into stories, into the alignment of temples. Our ancestors built this resilient system, this layered system. Built to outlast empires, to carry whispers across deserts of time, these visual symbols stored the crucial knowledge: astronomy, morality, survival. They weren't primitive drawings. They were sophisticated cognitive technology, the original hardware and software of civilization, and this whole journey points to a truth about human ingenuity. When faced with fragile memory, we didn't just surrender to forgetting. We turned the landscape into a library. We wove laws into patterns. We set calendars in the path of the sun. Every symbol was a choice, a declaration that some knowledge was too important to lose, that the story of who we are deserved to be told, even to listeners we would never meet. Now, in our own overwhelming information age, these ancient methods pose a quiet challenge. We generate more data in a day than past cultures did in centuries. But our storage feels fragile, locked behind formats that might not last a lifetime. That ancient approach asks us to think differently, to consider not just access but endurance. Not just quantity but meaning. What from our dizzying digital world is worthy of being etched metaphorically into granite? What principles, what discoveries, what hard-won wisdom do we want to inscribe into the foundation of the future? Their legacy pushes us to be more deliberate curators of our own era's story. So next time your eyes pass over an ancient symbol, in a museum, in a photo, on a weathered stone in a distant field, pause. Look again. You're not just looking at art or an artifact, you're reading a message carefully composed, painstakingly stored, sent with a hopeful trust across the centuries. It carries a silent question: will you understand?